So you've got a funeral policy, or perhaps you've got more than one funeral policy, or maybe you're in the market for a funeral policy. Either way, this video is going to help give you some insights into things that they never tell you about funeral policies. Now, let's get started. The first thing that I want to share with you is a funeral policy payout is not immediate. So it's not immediate. Even though the insurance companies are explaining that the payment can take place very quickly, and in some instances, they might say that this happens within 48 hours. It's critically important for you to know that the payment itself can only take place once the claim has been initiated, meaning you'll have to supply the insurance company with certain documents, things like the death certificate, the ID, and whatever other requirements the insurance company will call for before they can actually make that payment to you. Now, if you are focused on your loved one, or it could even be yourself, how long would they be able to wait? Can you afford to wait or delay the funeral in order for you to receive that payment? So this is the first thing that I need you to know, is that funeral policy payments are not going to be immediate. Now, you might ask me, how do we counter that? Because the entire purpose of the funeral policy is to cover funeral expenses. Well, in most instances, families tend to find out at that point in time that they need to have liquidity in order to cover the funeral costs. And then when they receive the payment from the insurance company, use that to settle the, however they've chosen to fund it. In your case, however, because you're watching this video, I want to share with you one pro tip that you can use in order to alleviate this. And that simply is creating what would be an emergency fund. So you can create a separate pool of savings, and that savings itself can be structured to use towards your funeral or the funeral for a family member. And then that buys you time. So it buys you time so that you then are in a position to top that up when the insurance company eventually makes out their payment. So this is how you can navigate around the fact that the funeral policy is not an immediate payment. But I want you to be mindful about the requirements that are needed, because you can be one step ahead of the game and make sure that your documents are ready. So there's certain documents that the insurance company would call for, and you can perhaps keep a file, or you could make your family aware of what documents are needed, so that they're able to escalate the payment of this claim, as well as providing details of who's helped you with your policy or which insurance company it's sitting at, in order, again, to escalate the payment. Now, the second thing that I want to share with you, and this is going to sound extremely strange to you, is funeral policies are actually quite expensive. Now, you might be thinking, Devin, I'm paying 100 Rand for the funeral policy. That's extremely affordable. Why are you saying that it's expensive? You want to relate the cost of a funeral policy to the cost of a life cover policy. Now, I'm going to use an example. Let's, in my example, use a premium of 250 Rand. Now, you might find that 250 Rand on a funeral policy, perhaps you could have, again, I'm just using an example, say two funeral policies, giving you 30,000 each, in my example. And this is the funeral policies here. Whereas with the life cover policy, for the same 250,000, you might end up, 250 Rand, you might end up with 100,000 of life cover. So you'd notice the difference between the two. A life cover has 100,000, and two funeral policies at 30,000 each works out to 60,000. But it's the same premium that you are spending. So funeral policies are a lot more expensive than a normal life cover. And the reason for that is simply because of payment. So in terms of payment itself, a funeral policy usually is going to make payment within 48 hours. So because it's so quick, that's the reason that you're paying a slightly inflated price for it. Whereas with a normal life cover itself, the insurance companies have a bit more time before they have to make the payment. And because of that time perspective, they're then able to provide you with a lot more cover at a lower price. So just from a timing perspective, that becomes important. Also critical is sometimes you might do a funeral policy where there's no life cover, where there's no medical test required. And if you're not doing any medical tests, then the insurance company doesn't really understand your health risks, and the price for that particular benefit might be a bit more. Whereas if you are taking a life cover and you're completing medical tests, those medicals are specifically relating to you and your health, and as a result of it, the premium itself might be a lot less. So that's your next key factor that I want you to be mindful of. And then the next thing last tip that I want you to be mindful of here is just in terms of your need. If you have a look at your bank statement or your salary advice, how many funeral policies have you taken out? If there are more than one funeral policy, you want to start to analyze whether you actually have a need for all those different types of funeral policies, especially if there's more than one. Sometimes you might have a policy with a bank, a funeral cover that's automatic using maybe the banking system that you have, and they automatically provide it. So would you need to have a second policy in place, a second funeral policy, considering that you're only going to pass away once? You might want to then consider the option of taking out a life cover policy, because a life cover policy is going to allow you a lot more cover at a lower price, which means it just increases the funding again for your family. So from a need perspective, you want to be mindful. And then something that is very easily overlooked when it comes to funeral policies, and this is what I would call group life cover. So group life cover. This is if you have a pension fund or a provident fund. Pardon me, let's write this down again. Yeah, if you've got a pension fund or a provident fund, and that benefit allows you what's called group life. It means if you had passed away, it's so many times your salary as a death benefit. If you are disabled, it provides you some cover. And again, they might have something in place if there's a funeral. Check with your HR if something like this exists, where you have company insurance cover by your company. Now, if you already have a funeral benefit here inside of your group life cover, then you want to analyze whether you need another funeral benefit, meaning outside of that funeral cover, do you still need to have one with the banks? Do you still need to have one with insurance companies? Do you still need to have one attached to various types of policies? Because of the fact that you've got one of these funeral plans in place, you can then save the money and channel that towards perhaps another need or even settling debt. But as I said to you earlier, in order for you to get life cover itself is going to be a lot less in price than funeral cover, especially if you're going to have the medicals done on your own. Now, I'd love to hear from you if you've got more than one funeral plan in place. How does this help to change how you're seeing funeral plans? And what's your next step? How are you going to tackle that? If there's something about funeral policies that you're not sure and you just want to inquire, then I encourage you to raise a question. Or if you've got a general question about financial planning, please raise that in the comments below as well. If your question is good or successful and chosen, then we'll do a video on it, in which case we can showcase this to others. Now, this channel is aimed at providing you with tips, tricks, and special strategies and techniques that you can use in order to grow your wealth, save you money, and reduce your taxes. More importantly, I'm aiming to give you these tips and strategies in such a way that you can implement them easily in the shortest amount of time so that you can start to see massive amounts of benefits. So on that note, if you have not already done so, then I want to encourage you to subscribe to the channel so that you are able to be provided with this content as soon as we produce it. And you can also click on the bell, which is the notifications, and then you'd get a pop-up notification letting you know as soon as a video is released from the channel. And lastly, remember that the comments below, I'm always watching them and viewing, so I'd love to see what you have to say and how is this video helping you to save money. So please post them below.